My greatest critics and admirers often ask me why, in the later years of my career, I have a scribe to write my imaginings for me, and I would like to take this opportunity to put any speculation or controversy to rest. I can assure you now that I am in good physical health, and that I have not suffered from any delusions of grandeur as far as I am aware. If anything, I find my work to be mediocre at best. So to those who wish me well, be happy, and to those who do not, I apologize for giving you false hope. No, the reason I stopped picking up the pen is one far more harrowing than that. My body may not be pained, and my ego may be intact, but what has happened to my mind is something that cannot be undone. You see, there is an image rooted in the back of my head, and like a penny glued to the floor, I cannot pick it up or remove it, no matter how much I might try. An image from a series of nights I am tortured to never forget. The most significant thing about the first night was perhaps how insignificant it was, for it started, like any other, amongst the general clutter of my study. Like a magpie, I had grown fond of collecting anything that caught my eye, books and letters mostly, and using it to build a paper nest. As such, the room was covered, from floor to desk to walls, with fallen books, loose papers, and spilled ink. My peers have always told me that there is no place in an academic's mind for mess, so I messed up my study to ensure my head was not filled with unnecessary organization. Whenever I wondered where something was, I would not have to root through my mind for a specific reference, or remember where I'd left it on the bookshelf. No. Instead, I had the liberty of getting on my hands and knees and searching for it. It was often during these moments of physically searching, wading through the countless mounds of books and staining my hands with the paper blood of ink, that I would have the most profound thoughts and moments of epiphany. I would always attribute it to the physical act of the search. After all, if I had known exactly where to look for that text, then I would have simply fetched it without having time to think. Significance in the simple, I call it. It is important for the mind and body to be properly balanced, for intelligence to be preserved. Too much organization, and the brain gets muddled with unnecessary complication. It was during one of these moments of illumination that the peculiarity of the night started to take form. As usual, I took to my desk, brandished my pen, and dipped it into my inkwell. However, when I lifted my pen from the well, it was covered with a thick black liquid with a mucus-like texture. I realized I must have left the lid off the last time I used it, an accident I had never made before, and decided this strange black slime was merely dried ink. Still, I had never seen ink take on the consistency of congealed blood before, and I looked at it in disgust as I wiped it away on some tissue and saw it twitch, slug-like, as it tried to cling on to my pen. I stirred my inkwell and looked inside, and it seemed to be gone, so I dipped my pen again and started writing. I don't quite remember what it is I was writing. It was many years ago after all, but I remember finding great importance in it, so I was at it for quite some time. On occasion, the sludge would wrap itself around my pen again, and I would have to shake it off, but other than that, there seemed to be no faults with the ink. At one point I shook the well to mix it, and I could feel that the weight of the substance had sunk to the bottom. Still fixated on writing, I resolved to only change the ink when it became unbearably mud-like and impossible to work with. This meant that as time went on, the writing on my page became gloopy and thick, and the words began to look as if they were creatures trying to writhe their way out of the paper, each word looking more and more alive. I found it amusing at first, but the novelty quickly wore when I realized the living words were too stubborn to dry, and instead looked like they were crawling, reacting to the paper. It was time to refill the well. Ink is one of the few things I have a designated place for in my study, for one important reason. Leaving a bottle of ink in the wrong place can lead to disastrous consequences, which several stains on my study floor can prove to you. Walking into a room and seeing books in a pool of their own blood from some accidental spillage is no less tragic than the death of anything else, so I kept my jug of ink on the windowsill behind my desk. A large glass container kept closed with a cork. The sun stopped the ink from freezing during the day and becoming ruined, and I rarely went near the window, so the chance of accident was reduced. I picked up the inkwell to bring it to the jug. Still feeling the weight of the slime at the bottom, my curiosity clutched me, and I looked inside. It was then that I saw the eye. Staring up at me from the blackness of the thick ink bog, the eye is almost too horrific to describe, and too grotesque to forget. A hideous lump of jellied flesh. The whites of the eye had been stained black, but the blue iris and the grim aperture of its pupil glared at me as if it was still alive. The eye was oozing a dark, pus-like liquid from several holes and lacerations I must have inflicted on it when I dipped my pen, and the thought that I had been writing with flesh made my stomach convulse and my body rigid with tension. As it looked up at me, I felt my heart writhing in my chest, each beat making me shudder even further. My next reaction was immediate, almost instinctive. Holding the jug, I poured the ink into the well to cover up my horrifying find. I prayed that it would not decide to float as the ink drowned it once more. I continued my work, my body still shivering against my will. I was careful not to dip my pen too far into the well in case I prodded the thing, but as time went on I began to grow increasingly unsettled, knowing that the disembodied part was still there, at the bottom of the inky depths, its gaze fixed on the sharpness of my cautious pen, which would dare not dive too far. This nervousness only worsened when I had used a bit more ink, and I could see its blue iris at the surface, watching me from the well. I'm not sure if it squirmed, or my mind did, for I swear I saw it blink, and then I knew that I would not be able to continue on that night. I retired to my bedchamber to rely on the horrors of my sleep. At least I knew those were not real, but even in my sleep, the image of the eye would not leave me be. The dream I had that night started, as all dreams do, in the darkness of closed eyes. I was in the middle of what appeared to be a cave, with a thick, black mist encroaching my sight. There was a strong scent of alcohol, and a bitter, gas-like stench burning my eyes and nose. From above me I could feel a warmth, and a dim orange glow shone on me, but I did not look up. Not yet. Because, after a few steps in this darkness, I saw the eye again. This time, it was huge, at least twice my size, and I could see every black vein clutching onto the iris, and the great pit of its pupil looking straight up in horror. A shadow was suddenly cast over me, and when I looked up, I saw a great metal object with a sharp point, like an inverted church spire. I screamed as I saw it come down into the cave and pierce the eye, which wriggled rapidly. The enormous pen pinned the eye's pupil, and was still pressing down on it with such force that I could see the eye split in the middle and leak like a boil. I heard the most demonic shriek, which echoed around the walls of the cave, but I could not tell if it was the screams of the eye or the one holding the pen. The pen slowly lifted from the carcass of the eye, which was now a mess of groaning, twitching flesh, and I saw the eye fail to cling on to the tip of the pen with meaty tendrils. The pen was gone, and I was left alone with the pool that had once been an eye. Moments later, I felt a shadow again, and I looked up to see my own eye, enlarged and terrified, at the top of the cave. The scream sounded again, splitting the darkness and forcing me awake. I left my bed and rushed immediately to the study, still in my nightcap and gown. The sight of my study during the morning was a rare thing for me. I remember realizing, on this particular morning, just how messy it really was. In the dim light of the evenings, most of the mess was obscured by the darkness, but here in the starkness of the morning sun, everything was exposed, consenting or not. It was underneath this hideously bright light, which pierced through my window, turning it into a lens, and filling the sickly sweet-smelling air with heat, that I realized there were not just ink stains on the floor. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it, but the evidence was there, taunting me. Underneath the mound of books and papers, looking so bright in the white of the sun, was a carmine pool of shimmering blood. Worse than that was the hand of a corpse, stained with ink on its palms, protruding from the bottom of the pile. How long had it been there? How had I not seen it when that very night I had been digging through the paper soil above its grave? Was it not just ink on my hands that night? I held my breath to stop myself from screaming, the vice around my gut tightening. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call the authorities. My study was always locked, and I was the only one with a key, so they would surely have put me away for the crime. I kept thinking, but the only answer that came to me was a thought so horrific I could not entertain it. No, I would not. I would not, I would not, I would not. No matter how many times the thought came to me, no matter how many times it seemed like the only way out, I would not think about it. But then I did. I did, and it made so much sense. I had to hide the body. Bury it, even. Somewhere nobody would think to look. I hated myself for thinking it, and I hated myself even more for having the conviction to carry it out. My grisly thoughts would not come to fruition, however, for when I dug through the paper grave to exhume the body, I discovered nothing. There was no trace of a corpse at all. Not even of the hand I could have sworn I had seen. It was almost like it had hidden itself, as if it melted away into liquid flesh and slipped through the cracks in my floorboards to never be seen again. The blood had gone too, and I decided I must have been hallucinating. A flicker of light in my brain, the fumes of my ink, too many late nights alone in my study with only my twisted mind to keep me company. If only I had known that I was sharing that lonely little room with the most demonic horror. Perhaps then I would have gone and gotten help. But I didn't. Instead, quivering, I decided to check on the Inkwell again. My second inspection of the Inkwell was one full of hesitation. The thought of seeing that lump of mangled, gelatinous flesh again made my jaw stiff, and my throat convulse as if heaving. It took me a long time to find the courage to look inside, but when I did, I was relieved to see that the eye had also gone away. However, while the body and the stain left no trace of itself behind, the eye had left a trail of flesh along my desk. A bloody breadcrumb trail for me to follow. I traced my finger along my desk, a lump of vomit bubbling at the back of my throat as I tracked the movements of the thing down onto the floor and up to one of the unorganized bookshelves. It left a fleshy rope up the spine of one of the books, and the trail stopped there. I could have sworn I saw the book tremoring, its slow shudders inching itself out of the shelf. I quickly grabbed the book and placed it onto the desk, slamming it with my palm repeatedly. I could feel something inside the book writhing as I yelled and smashed it against the desk until it stopped. I could see blood pouring out of the sides of the book, staining the pages as it oozed out from in between them, pulpy and flesh-like, like juice squeezed from a red berry. My desk was beginning to look like a butcher's slab, splattered with bloodstains from when I had slammed the book against it. I must not have noticed the blood spraying out of the book when I was caught up in the act of killing whatever was inside. I decided the thing must be dead, and resolved to opening it up to discover what it was. Shaking, I turned the book over, and quickly flipped it open before flinching and stepping away. Upon first glance, I thought the thing was a slug that had burst open, but it didn't take me long to realize that in fact it was a human tongue, still writhing in what looked like pain as blood poured out from within it. The pink organ flailed around on the page, flicking its crimson insides across the desk as I looked at it in terror. I felt myself petrified as I saw the thing crawl off the desk and land on the floor with the squelch of a boot in mud. Then, and to this day I'm still not sure how, I saw the tongue slip between the cracks of the floorboard and vanish. I stood in silence. I took a sharp breath, suddenly remembering the vitality of breathing, and closed the curtains immediately. I would say I closed them to stop any wandering eyes from looking inside, but in reality, I think I just wanted to hide away from everything I had just seen. The irony, of course, is that my curiosity wouldn't allow me to lock my study and pretend nothing had happened. Not yet. What I had seen was real, orchestrated by forces beyond my imagining that I wanted to understand, and so within half an hour I found myself on the floor of my study in the company of an oil lantern, prying at the floorboards with the poker from my fireplace. I felt more comfortable in this darkness, where I could pretend the sweet metallic smell and wetness of the floor were from ink alone. After all, both blood and ink look the same under the orange glow of a lantern. After dislodging a few floorboards, which threw a layer of dust into the air and burned my nose, I peered into the darkness underneath my study. The drop was not insubstantial, as I couldn't see the floor until I brought my lantern closer to the crack. When I dangled the lantern down into the dark, I discovered an entire room beneath my study. It appeared to be empty, apart from a figure hunched over in the corner of the room. Without hesitation, I began to climb down into that strange room. I knew I was being foolish, but I did not care. I had to understand what I had unearthed. I thought about my study, how I would find out all those things and have all that inspiration, not from reading, but from plunging into the depths of that pile of papers to look for what I had wanted. Now I had to do the same by diving into that forgotten space where that living tongue had gone. I landed in the room, with a drop that could have shattered my knees had I not been careful. There was a dense fog of dust that clung to the outside of my lantern, dimming its light. The place was full of cobwebs with bits of flesh attached to them that the spiders must have thrived off. I saw a number of them feasting away at the disgusting parts, and it was on one of these webs that I saw the tongue trying to wriggle its way free of the webbing. There were spiders crawling all over the tongue, binding it together with silken rope that was quickly stained red with its blood. It appeared to be trying to change its shape, like it did to slip through my floorboards, but the spiders had it bound too tight. I could hear the figure in the corner groaning in pain, its hoarse voice like howling wind. I moved as close to it as I could bear, so I could see what it was. A frail creature. It looked like a man, but its body was a mess of flesh. Its skin was covered with lesions, it was missing an eye, and its tongue appeared to have been severed. Blood was pouring out of its eye socket and its mouth, and it seemed to be in agony as it groaned and cowered in the corner. Though I did not know what this thing was, or indeed how it was still conscious, or even alive, I found myself feeling sorry for it. It seemed to be indicating something to me, with the stubs it had for fingers, pointing at the web where its tongue was hanging, and then at its mouth. It opened its other hand and placed it over its empty eye socket, and I heard a squelching sound as it struggled to put something inside. When it pulled its hand away, it had placed a hideously lacerated lump of jellied black flesh inside of its eye socket. It did not take me long to realize that the flesh now in its socket was the eye that had been living in the bottom of my inkwell, and was maimed by my pen, now a stained and mangled mess, like a leaking boil. Now the creature had me feeling both sorry for it, and guilty for harming it. I felt obliged to retrieve its tongue. I didn't stop to question why it had been in my study in the first place, or indeed why it chose to torment me with its tongue and tricks of bodies. I should have. If I had known what it was, I would have done something, anything to try and stop it. Instead, I felt that whatever had happened to this creature was in some ways my own doing, and I was set on helping it however I could. So, I took its tongue down from the web, felt those spiders nip at my hand like needles as I tore through their silken home to get that slimy, slug-like tongue, which wriggled in the palm of my hand as I gave it back to the grateful monster. I shuddered as I watched it place the tongue back into its mouth as though it were fixing a dislocated joint, and saw the creature sink into a pool of blood and slip away through the cracks in the wall, coughing out a word of thanks as it left. I had helped this creature to survive, I thought. If I hadn't, it surely would have died from all the blood that it was losing. I never saw the creature again, but I heard about it. For a while the stories were hard not to hear. The tale of the leper ghoul and the half-eaten carcasses. That creature was watching me through the inkwell, toying with me the way a cat toys with its prey. It manipulated me into helping it, so it could feast on people in their own homes. I should have ended it, instead of saving it, but I let it go on killing. I know now that in saving the monster, it had decided to spare me, despite what I had done to its eye. I soon learned that it had found another eye, stripped from one of its victims. It is because of me that the creature is loose, and as far as I am aware, it is still killing to this day. And so I vowed to never go near that inkwell again. I hired a scribe, who is now looking at me like I'm mad, and left my study locked for good, so I would never have to revisit that ghastly scene. But the eye won't leave me alone. I've dreamt of it for years. Each night, another scream is added to the nightmare. Another victim. I, too, am one of its victims. For while many lost their lives, I alone have lost my mind. This will be the final writing of my career. So to those of you who like my works, I'm sorry, and to those who do not, you are welcome. I have had a long and successful career, but it has been one that should never have been. That creature should have killed me when I saved it, but it let me go on writing. Perhaps it knew that death would be too swift, too kind. Death is easy after all. The greater torture is to live. And the story ends there. If you enjoyed the content, please like, comment, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, and if you have your own story that you would like to submit, please email us at frontierstorysubmissions@gmail.com. Until next time, in the depths of space, there's always another story to be told.